Part 7, Chapter 7, Beatlemania. It all happened very fast. At the start of 1963, the Beatles were still playing small clubs or performing as an opening act for other bands. Then, that March, their first album came out in England. It was called Please Please Me, and it became a big hit on the British charts. That's a list of best-selling records. Even on their early songs, the Beatles sounded special. They had two main singers, John and Paul, who knew how to perform harmonies together. Their songs always had a catchy chorus, and the band loved to yell in happiness at the end of some parts. The spirit caught on. By fall, the Beatles could sell out a show in half an hour. They were so popular that fans chased them everywhere. A newspaper in England came up with a way to describe this excitement: Beatlemania. In the United States, though, the Beatles were still unknown. Their first song in the U.S. was such a flop that their record company got rid of them. So they signed with Capitol Records. When Capitol was slow to put out a new song, Brian got on the phone and yelled at the managers. He said that I Want to Hold Your Hand would be a big hit. Brian was right. The song went to number 1. Yeah, look at her. On February 7th, 1964, Beatlemania hit America. That's when a plane arrived at Kennedy Airport in New York City containing 4 nervous young men. John, Paul, George, and Ringo were coming to America for the very first time. There had never been rock stars from England before. They've got everything over there, George said about the United States before the big trip. What do they want us for? Brian didn't have any doubts. He kept telling everybody that the band was going to be huge. And as soon as they got off the plane, the Beatles proved Brian right. Thousands of screaming teenagers showed up to greet them at the airport. The Beatles were cute. Girls pushed themselves up against the fence separating them from the airplane. They cried when John, Paul, George, and Ringo walked out of the plane. Some of the fans even passed out when the Beatles waved. At the airport, the Beatles held a press conference. Reporters were used to hearing polite answers from rock and rollers. Even Elvis called reporters sir. But the Beatles made jokes. One reporter asked them to sing a little. "We need money first," John said, giving everyone a good laugh. Soon reporters were scribbling down every word the Beatles spoke. 2 days later, the Beatles played 5 songs on the Ed Sullivan Show. And that day they made history. More than 73 million people across the country watched. That was almost half of everyone in the United States. When it was over, The Beatles performed many sold-out concerts, including 2 at the famous Carnegie Hall in Manhattan. All this attention also helped other British bands become popular in America. The Rolling Stones, the Animals, the Kinks, the Dave Clark Five, Herman's Hermits, and Freddie and the Dreamers. They were all groups from England that became famous after the Beatles. The press called this the British invasion. Some of the other groups were also from Liverpool. The new music was called the Mersey Sound, after the Mersey River, which runs throughout Liverpool. Beatlemania didn't just mean selling out concerts or making #1 records, or girls screaming or boys wearing their hair long. The Beatles belonged to kids of the 60s, the same way Frank Sinatra belonged to their parents. In 1964, the Beatles made their first movie, A Hard Day's Night. A lot of the action in the movie showed the band running away from fans. It was a big hit. By now, John, Paul, George, and Ringo were no longer 4 guys from Liverpool. They were the Fab Four, even bigger than Elvis. They were still young and inexperienced, though, and sometimes made mistakes. John once told a reporter that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus now. Many people were deeply offended. Some radio stations held protests with big bonfires. People were invited to throw Beatles albums into the flames. John quickly apologized, but the experience changed the band. They had to watch what they said and how they behaved. Being the Fab Four didn't seem as fab anymore.